But yeah, I mean, listen, when I read this, this was an 11-week trial. The jury was out 8 days. It's not like if the jury didn't think about it and came back in 90 minutes and convicted our client. The jury struggled. They had to have struggled because 8 days is. I've never had a case that the jury's been out that long, and it was clear that they had questions, and I really wasn't able to properly defend my client. Mr. Williams did not get a fair trial. When I read this, I think there's like some kind of a defense mechanism when you try a case for 11 weeks that you start forgetting things. When I read this, it brought it all back, and it reminded me of really how unfair the judge was with Mr. Williams, and the detrimental effects that it had for me to be able to properly defend my client.